really the only step you can control is the noticing.
Mm-hmm.
And then not judging it. And then the more you notice, the more you notice, and the more you can step toward what it is that feels good. And like you said, elevates you rather than what punishes you or puts you down or makes you feel worse.
Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm Rachel Astarte. Debbie Emick is a co-creator and blogger at gobucketyourself.com. She is the co-host of the One Life Live It podcast, and she's author of The Other Side of Perfect, which is a book she wrote about overcoming chronic illness. Debbie, thank you for being on Self Talk.
Thank you for having me, Rachel. I appreciate it. It is completely my pleasure.
It's good to have you here. So let's jump right in. Tell me and all of us a little bit about your book and how you found yourself on this journey.
Sure. So about 10 years ago, I started navigating the waters of discovering and being diagnosed with autoimmune disease. For anyone that's on that path, they know that like once there's one diagnosis, it's just a snowball effect sort of consecutive diagnosis. And I would say that at first, not knowing anything else, I went to doctors. I took a lot of prescription medications. I just trusted what I heard and what I was told in appointments. But I found myself in a place where I was taking like 9 prescription pills a day, 3 times a day, and feeling worse than when I started. And so I luckily had a nudge to shift to some other doctors, and then started to realize that I could also control my health and my life through other means. So I started doing what I can now say are sort of like superficial healing things, which may not be easy for a lot of people, but they were simple, like eliminating certain foods that were inflammatory or I was allergic to. So, really working on my diet, working on my exercise. So making sure I stayed as healthy and as fit as I could, given the circumstances that I had, taking some supplements and working on like nutrition in that way. And finally, after a moment with one of my doctors, I decided that if I left my job, I had been a teacher for about 14 years. And if I left my job, that I thought was pretty high stress, then that would be, like the thing that would solve all of my problems. And it wasn't until after I did that, and I thought I had done everything I could to heal, that I found myself in a really dark place, like the darkest I had ever been, and still in physical pain in my body. And so this book was kind of my own healing, getting out of that dark place, and then maybe alchemizing that into a way that hopefully could benefit others as well. So
yeah. So how did you know you were ill? What started happening for you?
I think there were probably whispers for quite a while that I ignored, but when I finally decided to seek medical help, I had like mowed the lawn, and I had so much pain in my hands and wrists and elbows and shoulders that I couldn't push a shopping cart the next day.
Wow.
Or my husband and I are hikers. We live in Colorado, and I just had this really painful experience coming down from a 14er that same summer, where I just could barely make it down because of pain in my hips. Some other stuff like that, where it was kind of like, ooh, I can't ignore this any longer. And so I went to the doctor because of that physical pain.
And what did they diagnose you with? Or was it just general Yeah.
Yeah. So eventually, I was diagnosed with something called mixed connective tissue disease. So there are certain markers in blood for autoimmune diseases.
Mhm.
Um, and mine is a combination of lupus and a specific autoimmune disease called relapsing polychondritis that attacks cartilage.
Wow.
And mine had attacked the cartilage in my lungs. So it had almost completely destroyed my trachea and bronchioles. So there's collapse when I was breathing. So that
Mm.
was kind of the first real, I guess, like at the time, scary moment where it was like, okay, I'm either going to need medical intervention to be able to breathe. My life might not be as long or as high quality as I had hoped.
Mm.
Yeah, just a moment of a lot of question there. Since then, since I've been going, I was most recently diagnosed with something called pulmonary hypertension, which causes heart failure eventually. And so, yeah, just a list of diagnosis that kind of creates some fear or anxiety over what the future might look like for sure.
Yeah, I can see that, or it seems to make sense that you're living your life and all of a sudden these things that you don't quite understand are happening to your body. And then, um, and then really looking at your mortality pretty quickly,
Right.
as opposed to, oh, maybe it's arthritis, maybe it's something that, that we can manage, and then having all these question marks around. And so how did you deal with the fear?
Yeah. So at first, I think I took it as like another way to just get better at these unconscious coping mechanisms that I had developed.
So you drew the
Um,
connection between the two.
so I think at the time I really didn't know,
Okay.
but I was a perfectionist, like a people pleaser.
Mhm.
I was really quiet and like secretive about the health issues I was going through at first. So it was like another thing to sort of hold close and keep a secret. And
Mm.
also I used these ways to continue to perfect myself, right? So controlling my diet can be really healthy. But I'm sure that I overdid it and over controlled seeking my own control.
Mhm.
Exercise can be really healthy, but I almost did it to like a punishing amount, right? Where it was just like, I overdid it. So I used this to like continue to people please and perfect myself until that really dark moment. When I didn't know at the time that the two were related, like my mental, emotional health and what was going on in my body.
Interesting.
I couldn't make that connection. I went to someone that calls herself like a chiropractor in my small community. That's like an accessible word. She's probably more of a healer. She did some somatic work on me, and
Mm.
and that really made it clear that there was like this repressed trauma, these repressed emotions. I'm like a positive person, forgive, move on, but all of that was very superficial.
Mm.
And so that made it really clear that there was a connection between um, just my personality style, my coping mechanisms, and some repressed emotions and trauma from when I was younger that I had never dealt with. And
Yeah.
then I could start making the connection between maybe some things that were going on with my nervous system or just the mystical, magical way that we are, and this connection between this physical pain in my body.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all connected, right?
Yeah.
Because, that's how we're built. Did
Yes.
you, in dealing with the past trauma, did you seek therapy? Did you just work with holistic healers? How did you work through it?
Yeah. So, I mean, in retrospect, it would have been wise to see a therapist. That just, you can tell, I'm sure that that was not quite where I was at. And so I did see the chiropractor who was doing that somatic work, that like energy work with me.
Mhm.
And I feel like that got really deep really quick, right? I also was doing a lot of reading, and so I was working through shame on my own and
Mm.
being more vulnerable after reading Brene Brown.
Mhm.
Um, I was sort of identifying my own addictions, maybe, which were people pleasing and perfectionism after hearing and reading from Glennon Doyle. And then I read a book about journaling to heal. And that's kind of where the book began. I just wrote it all down. I just made a practice of journaling and getting it out that way. And then just being more open and vulnerable with what I had gone through and what, where I was at. And I think the combination of all of those things were therapy for me, but I didn't actually see a therapist.
Well, there are many different ways to get where you need to go. And journaling, is immensely healing too. So that's a good segue into how the book came about. Tell us a little bit about the book itself. So journaling is what kind of gave birth to it, and walk us through the highlights of what you cover in the book.
Yeah. So while I was going through this, I was really discovering that I didn't know who I was. I had developed this person around a persona to keep people like at arm's length, right?
Yeah, of course.
And to please people. So I was the person maybe that other people wanted me to be. But when I, was in this dark moment, I realized I didn't know who I was. And so this whole process was kind of just taking one step at a time to learn who I was and trust my own intuition and my own inner guidance. And so the book kind of started that way, just having these ideas and writing them down. And if all the book ever did was to help me heal so that I didn't continue these unconscious cycles with my own daughters, that was gift enough. But as I kept working on it, I could see the story falling into place. And so it kind of goes back into my childhood so that the reader can see kind of what happened and how I got where I was. And then it unpacks each step I took out of trust and faith and intuition to grow and heal and get better. Right. And so we end with where I am now, which is, I have a cardiologist and a rheumatologist and a pulmonologist, and I appreciate them. I'm grateful for them. I have a couple of prescription meds that help me stay healthy. And so I'm okay with taking those. But I also have a practice of taking care of myself mental and emotionally. And doing that has really allowed the physical pain to leave my body. And it's just allowed my body to do the slow work of healing because I've calmed my nervous system down and I've been able to, stay in that light for a while. So
what goes into your self-care for yourself and, to make sure that you have everything in alignment?
Yeah. So, I have a practice of meditating, journaling, which for me is gratitude, affirmations. So maybe seeing myself for my highest self and writing affirmations in that way. I do still exercise. So I try to use exercise as an active meditation, something that fills me up, not something where I'm pushing so hard, I'm punishing myself.
Right.
And I still take care of myself in all those other ways. I do try to use food to heal. I don't use it to control anymore as often as I can. And then just staying open and staying real, right? So not letting myself slide back into those, although that happens, right? There's some backslide, there's some regression sometimes, but doing the best I can to be open and honest and real and not try to control my environment or other people with my perfectionism or people pleasing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You mentioned earlier about trusting your intuition. So, and this comes up a lot, and it's such a wonderful way to, well, perhaps the only real way to negotiate the world is to trust that higher self. And I don't know if you felt this, but I've certainly experienced this with patients. How do you trust your intuition when you don't know who you are, when you don't know, you don't trust that you're coming from a place of your higher self, or maybe you're coming from the dysfunctional place. And I can't even hear my intuition. What is my, you know what I mean? So how do you discern that voice in your head or in your body or around you in spirit that says, this is what Debbie needs? And, how do you make sense of the voice?
Yeah. Well, I want to affirm anyone listening and saying that like, it was not easy at all at first. I didn't even know who I was. And then I was like piling on this shame for not knowing. Right. So beating myself up again for this place I found myself in. But ultimately, I think it does start with awareness, right? So whatever you have to do to get calm and become aware of your true self, right? So
what does that mean? What does that mean, the true self?
Yeah. So I had to realize there was this voice that was going to take up as much space as I gave it. And so meditating, I think, was a, unexpected way to sort of tap in to knowing there was this deeper me beyond that voice. I existed before that voice ever told me I was bad or shameful or whatever, right? And so being able to first just acknowledge or recognize that, as though not judging it, but just realize like, oh, there's that voice again. It's showing up. Yeah. So I think that's step one. And once you can just realize that that's going on without judging it, you can detach from it. So I am not that voice in my head. I am not the pain I feel in my body. I am not the experiences I have had. I existed before all of those things, right? And so when you can become aware, maybe you can tap into that deeper knowing. So I don't want to be super meta, but it is kind of about it is kind of about being able to be calm and centered. Like your trust and your intuition isn't going to try to convince. It's not going to try to make you feel shame. It's not going to try, it's not doing any of those things. When you're talking, it doesn't have like a high-pitched reactionary voice. It's a deeper, calmer sense, right? But at first, I don't know that I felt that. I just was curious. And luckily, I had a support system that allowed me to be curious. And I would just step toward my curiosity. And just for lack of a better word, it sucked sometimes. It did not feel great because I wasn't used to it. Yeah. And sometimes I failed. The things I was curious about didn't turn out being something I liked or wanted to keep doing. And I had to become okay with that too. And so it was just taking one step toward a curiosity and going, oh yeah, this feels right, or this doesn't feel right. Then taking the next step and the next step, instead of being like, this is, where I want to be way far out, just like curious, just the next step, just the next thing, just the next one.
Beautiful. And that's how you own every step of the way. And that's something that I encounter too with patients, is that they don't like where they are right now. There's this ideal person out here that they want to be. And that seems so far away. Like, I know I don't like this. I know I should be this way. They're shooting on themselves, Yeah. And I want to be this certain way, but it seems so alien to me. And in reality, that person out there that you want to be, you already are. In many ways, it's just sort of, I think of it like archaeology. We're just kind of getting rid of the dirt and the muck and mining the gems and the artifacts of who you truly are. Yeah. And that, the muck being all of the negative self-talk and the trauma, and capital T or small t trauma, that's allowed you to not trust yourself and not trust your voice. And I think you said something really helpful there too, is the sound of that voice, when not the high pitched, but, and also the big question to ask is this voice, is what I'm hearing serving me in any way? Is it helping elevate me, or is it telling me to stay small?
Oh, that's good.
Did you encounter that, do you think?
Oh, yeah. And I think like once you become aware, just noticing, then you just keep noticing, right? And I I honestly did not realize how often that voice in my head was just cruel,
Mm,
like a way I would never speak to someone.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so, yeah, but I did speak to myself like that so often. So once I started to notice, then I could notice again, and then I could notice again. And at first I might be like, oh, how could you talk to yourself like that? So there's that voice again, right?
Right.
And so just learning as often as I could, like really the only step you can control is the noticing
Mhm.
and then not judging it. And then the more you notice, the more you notice, and the more you can step toward what it is that feels good. And like you said, elevates you rather than what punishes you or puts you down or makes you feel worse, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a lot there in that too, that awareness, and that is the number one step. And also, to be able to be forgiving with
Mm,
yourself, as you mentioned a couple times, relapses. This is a process,
yeah.
and we have to kind of take two steps forward and one step back for a while, do that little dance until we get to where we want to go. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really helpful. Um, so if you don't mind bringing into, I know you worked a lot with holistic healing. Was there anything you did besides seeing this chiropractor? And I know meditation was helpful for you.
Mm-hmm.
What else did you incorporate into your healing?
Um, well, part of holistic healing, right, is like really eliminating toxic things in your life or that you put on your body or that you use in your house. So that was another one. And I think that has a deeper message too about like relationships and being able to create boundaries. Kind of changing who I was, and some of my relationships came along with me and some of them didn't, and that
Yeah,
that was okay too,
that's
right?
part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so learning who to surround myself with, and who could come along with me, and who it was like, that served me for a while, and it's not there anymore. Part of my holistic healing was like energy work, so working on my chakras, which I was super pragmatic before all of that started. And I sort of went out and looked for skeptics, so I was like, well, she wants to do this, and I can't believe she wants to do this. And the people that I went to that I trusted were like, well, you've tried everything else, why not try it?
Yeah.
And so the more I went down that road, and I could feel like the physical pain leaving my body, the more I was able to keep going. I
Mhm.
would say that, like, in retrospect, if I were to go back 10 years, it would have been nice to have a doctor or someone present a couple of books to me. And one is The Body Keeps the Score by
Oh,
Bessel van der Kolk. And
beautiful book.
then,
Yep.
yeah,
I think that should be required reading for everybody. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And then I don't know, you're probably familiar with When the Body Says No by
Yeah.
Gabor Mate.
Yeah.
So
And he's phenomenal too. Yeah.
yeah. So there's such a body of research out there, right? That this mind body connection
Mhm.
has a huge difference in our health, our heart health, our lung health, our physical health. And doctors just don't really talk about it. I did when I had that latest diagnosis of pulmonary hypertension. I acquired a cardiologist as well. And in my first appointment with him, he wrote out what he called a prescription. And in my mind, I was like, oh, great. I don't want another prescription. That's not why I'm here. And so he wrote down 4 things. And one was nutrition. So he really believes in a plant-based diet,
Beautiful.
vegan.
Mhm.
Yeah, most doctors don't really talk about that.
Yeah.
They don't talk about food at all.
Mhm.
And exercise. So, regardless of our health, just getting up and getting our heart rate up for 30 minutes a day at whatever we can do is good for us. And then he wrote a couple of things that no one else had told me. I had just had to read and come up with on my own. And so he wrote love and connection.
Mm.
And that is, there's so much research out there on the long-term effects of feeling disconnected or isolated.
Yeah.
And I didn't know it at the time, but it's true. And so each step I took toward being my authentic self and sort of peeling back these layers of perfectionism and people pleasing I was actually taking steps toward connecting with people that,
Mm,
that could support that and support me.
yeah.
And that just happened naturally by following my intuition. But what my cardiologist said really affirmed that. And the last thing he wrote was, mental health. And then he stopped and looked me in the eye and he said, now, I don't just mean like go meditate or do yoga. And I was like, okay, because I had been meditating and doing yoga. And he goes, I mean, find the rug, pick it up and sweep everything out from under the rug.
Mm,
And so I have to say that was a pivotal moment too, where I was able, it just gave me permission to keep doing the deeper work of things I had never dealt with. For
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Beautiful. And you mentioned just the importance of having a support team and
Mhm.
connection. Um, and as a therapist, I have to ask, how did your family support you, or were there conflicts, or how did they manage while you were going through such as this huge ordeal and transformation?
Yeah, I feel very grateful for sure that they came along with me. I mean, it took my own firm boundary setting and also just being honest, like I'm going to have to change and I'm going to have a hard time doing it and I'm going to need your help doing it. So
Beautiful.
it could have gone another way, right? Like, and that probably would have been okay too. But my husband really came along with me and my daughters are as supportive as they can be, but it meant like when this door's closed, I'm off limits unless there's like an emergency. I need
Yeah.
to work on me behind this door,
Yeah.
right? Or I need help making breakfast on these days of the week because I have these other things going on. And then just being really open and honest with my husband and it's taken, we're still getting there, but
Mm,
he's definitely trying to heal and grow and come along with me. And
mm,
he understands what I'm going through and he wants to support me in that. So I feel lucky. I also had a moment of just like trust where it was like, if we can't come along this path together, then that's how it's meant to be.
mm.
My growth may not be his growth and vice versa. And so, yeah, but luckily it didn't work out that way.
Yeah,
So.
everything gets put on the line because this is it. This is your life, and you're the only one who lives it. Did you encounter um, their grief or fear during this process? Because it's a
Mm,
scary thing. If you've got a bunch of medical issues and you're doing your best to heal yourself, but there's no guarantee.
yeah.
Where was there space in the family to talk about that?
So I have to say, as the mother, I may not have done the best job of that at first. Just being really quiet and private and closed off about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now it just kind of is what it is. And I feel really healthy. I look really healthy. I'm very active. There was definitely a lot of fear at first between my husband and I. And I would say it was an obstacle that I'm so grateful for now,
Mm-hmm.
being presented with this real moment of like, hey, your life may not go on forever. What do you really want to do with your life? So
Mm-hmm.
that was, step one of like,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm living the life I want to live. And so I was able, we together, my husband and I were able to use that obstacle as like a pivot point to be able to design the lives that we want. For sure. There was fear, definitely. And then every once in a while it would creep back in with that final diagnosis, which I have to say is the most severe of all of them. I felt like I had been doing all of this healing. I shouldn't be getting another diagnosis. Like, what is happening?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be sick anymore. At first, I think sometimes sickness happens because we can't slow ourselves down
Mm-hmm.
and we need permission to stop. We need permission to slow down. And
Right.
this sort of gives us that. And I felt like I'm doing all this real healing and I'm still getting this diagnosis. Uh, but a knowing sort of just crept in at that point that like, I'm going to be okay. We're all going to be okay. No matter what happens,
Yeah.
it's going to be all right. And so I'm grateful for all of it now. Our life is better because of it. Our health is better because of these diagnoses and all of that. And it just is now it's just a part of our life in a way that doesn't really take over, right? I don't identify with those illnesses anymore. We know this is the way my body is and how I have to support it, but I don't know. That was a long rabbit trail. I hope I answered your question.
You absolutely did. And that, because it's such a complex thing. And as you said a few times, we don't know what's going to happen, relationally or physically or anything like that. So part of it is that trust that, and again, trusting the intuition to guide you in the right direction. As you said, some relationships fall away, some relationships stay, new ones come, and that's all part of the journey. Could you speak briefly about your website, gobucketyourself.com? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So that's kind of funny. When I left my job, my husband and I had been like typical American, we'll get a good job, we'll have good pensions, and then someday when we can retire, we'll live our life, right? And then this illness happened, and that was a big pivot point. I mean, that was the first step in being like really honest. I had to go to him and say like, I don't even know if I'm going to live for retirement age. I don't know if I'll be alive then. I don't know what my body will be like. I don't know if I'll be able to do the things we want to do. And most importantly, I have 2 daughters that I would rather spend my time with right now than going off to work. And so I left my job, and we started to look for ways that we could design our life so that we weren't dependent on W-2 income. We could live our lives the way we wanted, whether we wanted to work for someone else or not. And so we started investing in some passive investments, and my husband's been able to leave his job and Go Bucket Yourself is kind of, it's like, the dream of like, how can other people learn to live their life for today and not someday? So that may not mean what it means to us, but just empowering other people to design their lives, to question their lives, to become aware of what's going on and why they're doing it, and then sort of guiding and helping along the way for them to be able to live their life for today and not someday. So
yeah, that's beautiful. And I think a lot of people get caught up in that American dream. As George Carlin says, you have to be asleep to believe it. I called that. But I love the idea of crafting your own life and forget what's expected of us and what society tells us, and redefining the roles, as it were. Yeah,
I like it that you said asleep, or George Carlin did, right? Because
that's why it's called the American dream. Yeah.
Yeah. Until you become aware of like, oh, I'm doing this because that's what everyone said I should do. Or I'm doing this because I think a car will make me happy, or this bigger house will make me happy. So yeah, again, it's just about the first step is awareness, right? And then if you really want the car and you want to work really hard to get the car, that's still your choice, right? But you need to be aware and know why you're making the choice and why you're doing it. So.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. That's really, really beautiful.
Thank you.
So the book is called The Other Side of Perfect. I love the title. And I just want to thank you, Debbie Emick, for being here on Self Talk. It's been a pleasure having you.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure for sure. I really appreciate the lovely conversation. Thank you so much, Rachel.